All right. Very exciting times, very exciting day. Hope you're all doing well. And we are going to continue. We're in the middle of a talk, of an essay, a lengthy one, which as we've discussed in the past few classes, this is officially the edited one particular talk where the Rebbe, Melech HaMoshiach, instituted the campaign, if you will, for the Jewish people to promote and teach and educate, etc., the 7 Noahide commandments for all of mankind, etc. And although he spoke about it many times, and before this talk as well, but this is the one formal talk where he edited it and put it out together, and it was actually said 40 years ago. So that's really a big deal. We know that 40 years is a big deal, similar to the Jewish people spending 40 years in the wilderness, and after 40 years, they were able to go into the land and they were able to understand properly the teachings and so on and so forth. Okay, now, we're in the middle of the middle, and I'm not going to review everything that we did in previous classes, and I just will remind you that we're not going to be actually reading inside, which is, the previous class already. I'm just reading it with my eyes as I translate and explain. So for those that want, for the sake of accuracy, we're in volume 26 of Likutei Sichois, the compiled, official, edited talks of the Lubavitcher Rebbe Melech HaMoshiach, and we are on the third talk of the weekly Torah portion of Yisro, Jethro, and we're on page 137. Now, at this point, we brought down 2 opinions as to what would be considered a ger toishav. And a ger toishav, as we explained several times, according to the Rambam, in a number of places, we do not have, I could say unfortunately, we do not have a ger toishav in the legal sense. And again, to remind you, ger toishav means that in the time when the Jubilee year is in effect, meaning, according to the Rambam, according to Maimonides, when all of Israel lives in the land of Israel, then if a non-Jew would like to live in the land of Israel and have certain rights and is treated with many rights, and he's basically a citizen of the land, although he's not a member of the Jewish nation, he's not a member of the tribe, but he is a citizen, a legal citizen of the land with rights. If he formally in front of a Jewish tribunal, a Jewish court, accepts upon himself blank, then he is a ger toishav. What is the blank? So here we have an argument, 2 opinions of the rabbis of the Tanoic level, meaning of the era of the Mishnah, which would be basically the times of the Second Temple. So we're talking about 2,500 years ago or so. One opinion says that the individual needs to accept upon himself not to worship or serve avodah zara, idolatry, anything other than Hashem, God Almighty, and Him alone. The other opinion says, no, that's not enough. He actually has to accept upon himself to keep the 7 Noahide commandments, of which one of them is the prohibition of avodah zara, of idolatry. Now, the Rambam rules according to the majority opinion, which is generally the case, and that is that it is necessary to accept all 7. We go along with that opinion. Otherwise, he would not be considered a ger toishav. He needs to accept all 7. as he says clearly, for example, in one of the places where he says that we can't have a ger toishav now without the Jubilee year. So he says over there, what is considered a ger toishav? This is an akum, a non-Jew, that accepted upon himself not to worship stars and constellations, along with the rest of the commandments that Bnei Noach were commanded. That's a very interesting way of putting it. So the question is, since he has to accept all seven, as the Rambam clearly alludes to, why does he separate that? It's almost like he's trying to appease the other opinion. I mean, there's clearly an argument. One opinion says it is sufficient for the non-Jew to accept upon himself not to worship idolatry. That's it. And even if he continues to transgress, or at least not to formally accept the others, he still is a ger toishav. And we reject that opinion, and we say, no, he's got to accept all seven. So why can't the Rambam just say it in a more clear language, which he is super clear and super organized and super meticulous? So why can't he say it in such a way, namely, that a ger toishav is one, a non-Jew, who accepts upon himself to keep the seven Ochad commandments? Why does he say accepts upon himself not to serve idolatry and to keep the rest of the seven commandments? There's something here. Maimonides is trying to tell us something. All right, that is the question. So, says the Rebbe Melech HaMoshiach, the explanation is as follows. It says in a particular source, let's call it a midrash, which is the homiletic interpretation and explanation of the Talmudic era. It says as follows. It's homiletic interpretations of the oral law to the written law, to the 5 books of Moses. So there's a verse that says, this is one of the 10 commandments, Lo yeh l'chol elokim acherim al panai. God says to the Jewish people, you shall not have any other gods in my presence. So says this interpretation as follows. Why does it need to say that? Right before that, the first of the commandments says, I am God, your God. So we can give a parable to a human king, a king of flesh and blood, who entered into a country. His servants, his close aides, if you will, say to him, make decrees upon the people. In other words, this is a king who's coming to overtake another country in this parable. So his subjects say to him, Your Highness, Your Majesty, make decrees on the people. The king says to his close, loyal servants, when they will accept upon themselves my sovereignty, my kingship, I will make decrees upon them. Because if my rule, my kingship, my sovereignty is not accepted upon them, then my decrees will not be accepted. Okay. In other words, he could do it by force, and he could say, don't do this, I kill you. But a proper king, monarch, is that the people want him, initially at least, to be king and accept his decrees. Okay, then if they don't keep it, fine. But he wants them, in this parable, the king says, first they have to accept me as their king, and only thereafter can I make decrees. That's the parable. So too, God says to Israel, I am God, your God. You shall not have any others, meaning I'm the one that you accepted my sovereignty already, referring to back in Egypt. And they said, of course, yes. And then God says to them, this is all by the giving of the Torah. Now accept upon yourselves my decrees, and here are my rules. Meaning to say that at the time of the giving of the Torah, the revelation at Sinai, when he said the so-called 10 Commandments, there were actually two ideas, two themes happening over here. The acceptance of his sovereignty and the acceptance of his decrees. And you can really split it, because first you have to accept him as your king. First you accept God is my God. Now let me hear, what does he have to say? What does he tell me? What are all the do's and don'ts? In other words, the mitzvahs, the commandments. Just parenthetically, let me just throw it out there. I don't know if you've heard this, but many people, at least in the Jewish world, they use the word mitzvah as good deed. That's how it's used often. That's not accurate. I mean, it's true, but that's not what mitzvah is. When you say good deed, it sounds like it's an optional, above and beyond the requirement. It almost sounds like a Boy Scout who does good deeds, who asks you to join the Boy Scouts. It's so nice of you to be a Boy Scout, and then you help that little old lady. Wow, you did a good deed for the day. That's not what a mitzvah is. That may include, a mitzvah may be part of that, but mitzvah, when you say good deed, is very misleading. The literal translation of mitzvah is commandment, and that word may seem a little bit harsh, and in today's world where we're all so hypersensitive and careful, etc., 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 so people may say, oh, don't use the word commandment, as I once heard someone jokingly say, we shouldn't really call them the 10 Commandments, let's call them the 10 Suggestions. At any rate, so what happened at the revelation of Sinai to the Jewish people is twofold. A, accepting the sovereignty, formally accepting the sovereignty of God, and then B, accepting his decrees, the commandments. Now, what's unique and special about accepting his sovereignty is expressed also in the fact that we heard, this is all part of the oral tradition, the Jewish people heard the first two statements, the first two commandments, directly from God, where he said, Anoichi, I am God, your Lord. And when he said, Lo yelecha, you shall not have any others. Whereas all the rest after that, we didn't hear directly from God, but rather it was through Moses. As the Talmud says, quite in a fascinating way. Let's deviate for a moment, and I think I'm allowed to tell you the following. If you ever heard of the concept of gematria, gematria is the numerical value that letters have. Like, for example, if you do that with the English alphabet, A would equal 1, B would equal 2, C would equal 3, etc. Now, of course, that would be confusing because we do have Roman numerals, and you have a C and you have an M, and it wouldn't really follow exactly like that. You have one line, which I guess is an I, but be that as it may. In the Hebrew alphabet, which, by the way, in my humble opinion, as I've mentioned previously, and I'll say it again, my understanding is there's nothing wrong at all with Noachites currently learning the Holy Tongue, what's referred to as Hebrew, because in the Messianic era, that will be spoken by all the nations. So It's not like, well, you have to wait till then. No, not at all. I mean, I may be wrong, but I don't think I am. And therefore, not only is it acceptable and permitted, my humble understanding is that nothing at all that's wrong with it. And on the contrary, like, why not? Be that as it may. The letters, there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And then there's another 5 final letters that if it's the last letter of a word, it takes on a different form, but it's the same letter. So 22 letters. Every letter equals a number. That would be 1 through 10, first 10 letters. Aleph, which is the first letter, is 1. The second letter, Beis, and not to be confused with the soft one, which doesn't have the dot inside, which is called the Beis, same letter. So the second letter is 2. Third letter is Gimel, that's 3. And then you go on till you get to the 10th letter, which is Yud, that's 10. Now, just like in numbers, in regular numbers that we're accustomed with in mathematics, there's only 0 through 1. And there's 1 through 9 or 0 through 9, and then you double up. So a 10 is a 1 and a 0. An 11 is 2 1s. It's a 10 plus a 1. A 12 is a 10 plus a 2. So it's 1, 2, which is 12. Same thing over here. Aleph is 1. Yud is 10. 10th letter is 10. The next letter, letter number 11, becomes 20. Okay? The next letter after that, the 13th letter is 30. 10, 20, the 12th letter. 12th letter is 30, and the 13th letter is 40, and so forth. And then, after you finish, you get to 90, the next letter equals 100. The one after that equals 200, and the one after that is 300, and the 22nd letter and the final letter equals 400. It'd be easier if we were looking inside, but this is just in general. My point being, every letter has a number value. And if you want to say 11, you would take the Yud and the Aleph. You take the number, the letter equals 10, and the letter which equals 1, put them together, so to say, form a word, and that would be 11. If you want to make 21, you would take the 11th letter, which is the Kaf, put an Aleph with it, the first letter, and then 20 and 1 would be 21, and so on and so forth. So every single word in the Tanakh has a numerical value. Take any word you want, and it equals a certain number, depending on the letters. So let's take the word Torah. Okay, that's found in the Torah. The word Torah, which means law or divine law, that is spelled with 4 letters. For those of you that know the alphabet and so forth, I hope you're following. For those that don't, I apologize. 4 letters make up this word. Okay, just like in English, it would be T-O-R-A, and then we add an H at the end, whatever. T-O-R-A-H or T-O-R-A. The way it's really spelled in the Torah language is Tav, which is the last letter, the 22nd letter. Vav, which is the 6th letter. Reish, which is the 20th letter. Hey, which is the 5th letter. Taf, Vav, Reish, Hey. Each one of those letters individually equals a certain number. The last letter equals 400. Taf is 400. Vav is 6. Reish is 200. And the final letter, Hey, is 5. Which equals in total, again, 400 plus 6 plus 200 plus 5 equals 400 plus 6 plus 200 plus 5 equals 611. Okay, 400, and then we have a 200 there. That gets you to 600. And then we have a 6 and a 5, which is 11. 611. So the word Torah equals 611. All right, big deal. What does that mean? What's that symbolic? Oh, everything is symbolic. Every single letter in the Torah with what it equals is very symbolic and very important. But that's beyond the scope of this. I just want to share with you something here. The verse says as follows. This is a verse towards the end of the Bible, of the 5 books of Moses, of the Torah. And it says as follows. Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Translated means Moses commanded us the Torah. So says the Talmud. To explain this in a sort of homiletically, Torah 611. We were commanded through Moses. Moses told the Jewish people 611 of God's commandments. 611 out of how many? What's the number that everybody should be familiar with? How many laws are there in the Torah for the Jewish people? 613. So Moses commanded us Jews 611. What happened to 2? The first 2 we did not hear through Moses. We did not need to get it through Moses because the Jewish people directly heard it at the revelation at Sinai by the giving of the Torah. We heard it directly from God himself. Okay, so those first 2 are not just commandments, but they are basically the idea of the Jewish people accepting the sovereignty of God. Once you accept him as your God, as your commander, now step number 2 is what are his decrees? What are his commandments? And then we got another 611 of those. All right, now we're going to get to the point of understanding why does Maimonides, the Rambam, say it the way he does about the Ger Toshav. Why does he say that it's one who accepts upon himself formally in front of a Jewish tribunal not to worship idolatry and the rest of the 7? Now, let's go back to that. A Ger Toshav, first thing, before he accepts the 7 commandments, he has to make the declaration, so to say, that he accepts that God is the commander. Again, to remind you that Maimonides stated that if a non-Jew keeps the 7 laws simply because they're moral laws and they're rational laws that make sense, he is not from the pious, righteous, or whatever of the nations of the world. And then depending on the 2 versions, either he's only from the wise of the nations or not even from the wise. But that's better than nothing. But that's not ideal. It's better than nothing. But ideally, every non-Jew is supposed to accept these commandments because they're God-given. All right, if that's the case, the Ger Toshav surely has to do it because God commanded. He can't come along and say, I accept these 7 laws, and I want to live in the land of Israel, and I want to be a Ger Toshav. I accept to keep these 7 laws. That would be insufficient. That's exactly what Maimonides is trying to hint to us. The first thing he has to do in his declaration is categorically reject idolatry. I will not worship anything other than God Almighty himself. No stars and constellation, no idols, no garbage, no other deity, nothing. That's the first thing he's got to do. And by doing so, again, comparing it to what we've been talking about for the Jew, that's sort of like the Jewish people's first 2 commandments of I am God, your God, and you shall not have any others. That would be how the non-Jew is first coming along and saying, I accept the commandment of Avodah Zarah. And then the other 6, which are important. But in a sense, That means to say that, if we can use this terminology, the most important of the seven, in a certain, when I say most important in a certain sense, is the one of Avodah Zarah, of the prohibition against idolatry, because that's the basic one. The rest are details. The rest are, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, or set up courts of law. But the first one means that you're doing it because God said so. Now, actually, similarly, we find by a regular or full-fledged, or whatever you want to use, a ger. And in rabbinic literature, we call him a ger tzedek. That's a terminology you won't find that really in the written law. It's a rabbinic term in order to differentiate between the ger toshav, which is a biblical term, and then it says ger by itself in the Bible many times. And sometimes it's a little confusing. Are we talking about the full-fledged convert, or are we talking about the ger toshav? So therefore, in rabbinic literature, there's ger toshav, and then there's ger tzedek. So when it comes to the regular full-fledged convert, which is called a full-fledged ger, or a ger tzedek, which means a righteous convert, sojourner. So what's the process? If a non-Jew wants to become Jewish, so in God's religion, in the Jewish religion, can the Jewish people, can the Jewish faith, can the Jewish tribunal accept an outsider, a non-Jew, to become a Jew? Can they or can they not? And to sum up a very long, detailed answer, the answer would be yes. But first of all, we don't proselytize. The Jewish people are not supposed to go there and try to convince the non-Jews to become Jewish. Not at all. We are supposed to do, as we're learning here, to go out there and bring the message of the 7 Noahide commandments and teach them about the 7 Noahide commandments. That we are most definitely supposed to do. That is true. But to become Jewish, not at all. But what happens when the non-Jew, the Noahide, is persistent? So then we have lots of details. And how does Maimonides explain it, which is found in the laws of forbidden relations? This comes in being that a Jew can't marry anyone who's not Jewish. So then comes in the whole topic about accepting non-Jews as Jews. How does that work? So the Rambam Maimonides says, the first thing that the Jewish court, the Jewish tribunal, informs this individual, this non-Jew, is Ikrei Hadas, the primary ideas of the religion, which are, very important, which are, says Maimonides, the unification of God and the prohibition against idolatry. That's the first thing we tell him. In other words, before we can get anywhere, that's number one. In other words, the acceptance of the sovereignty of God, the God of Israel. That's number one, accepting that he is God and he alone, and there is no other deity. Then continues the Rambam, Maimonides, next, we then inform this non-Jewish potential Jew individual a little bit of the light commandments, meaning not the heavy ones, and a little bit of the harsh ones, meaning the heavy duty ones. We don't tell them all, 611. Well, the truth is, it wouldn't really be 611. If you really want to get technical, it would be 613 minus 51, if you really want to get quite literal. But in other words, because there's 51 out of the 613, which are related to idolatry. But the point is, we don't tell them all of them. We don't bombard him with hundreds of commandments. The person got to the point where we're ready to engage in a discussion with him. He's that determined. So again, the first thing is we tell the person about the oneness, the unification of God, and the prohibition against idolatry. And then we tell them a little bit of these types of commandments and a little bit of those types of commandments. So, which that would be acceptance of the commandments. So again, you have first accepting the sovereignty of God and then accepting his commandments, which of course logically makes sense, just like the story of the king coming to this country, where he tells his servants, first they need to accept me as their king before I decree anything. And now, getting back to the Ger Toishav, same thing, because actually, I don't know if I'll be able to give over or to do justice with what I'm about to say. I don't know if you'll appreciate it as much, but I'll try. In general, it's very important, and we tell this to Jews all the time, and I'm telling it to you, Noachites, as well. There are two types of people, Jews and non-Jews. And in speaking, there's a Jewish word, a Hebrew word, which we use, and that word is lahavdil. Lahavdil means to make a distinction. You know, I will not even say it in one breath. Okay? Two different people. There's the chosen people, the people that God gave the Torah to exclusively, 613 commandments, his people. That's the Jews. And then there's the rest of the world that God has given the 7 Noahide commandments. And either you're Jewish or you're not. Now that's generally how I would say it. And I'm not saying that that is incorrect or inaccurate. However, I'll share this with you. When it comes to the Ger Toishav, again, is he Jewish or not? So the word Ger might be a little bit misleading. We say, no, he's not a Ger, as in Ger Tzedek in the rabbinic literature. He is a Ger Toishav, which simply means a non-Jew that is of the highest level, highest caliber. He keeps the 7 commandments, and he is allowed to live in the land of Israel, and he has certain rights. But he's not Jewish. We have one of the earliest commentaries on the Talmud. His name is Rabbeinu Gershom. This Rabbeinu Gershom, it's getting late, and I really should open up for questions and stuff. Let me just conclude with this point. Rabbeinu Gershom is perhaps most famous, at least in the Jewish world. He lived over 1,000 years ago, and he instituted certain rules as rabbinic rules, but since he lived after the conclusion of the Talmud, after the Talmud was already finished, so it's not binding for all the Jewish people, as it would be if it was still in Talmudic times, but it was accepted by most of the Jewish world. And that is one of the things that he has forbidden, big time, is polygamy amongst Jews. Until his day, as we know, through the Tanakh, through the written Torah, as well as the oral Torah, polygamy is biblically and rabbinic permitted. There's nothing wrong for a Jewish man, and for that matter, for a non-Jewish man, to have more than one wife at a time, as long as he can provide all of the responsibilities, all the needs that he's got to give her. Rabbeinu Gershom came and changed that. At any rate, that has nothing to do with our subject here. I don't want to confuse you. I just wanted to give you a little bit background on this Rabbeinu Gershom. Now, Rabbeinu Gershom, in his commentary to the Talmud, he uses 2 words to describe the legal status of the Ger Toishav. And he says, Ksas Gerus, which means a little bit of conversion, of being a convert, which is very interesting because it almost sounds like he's saying that he's kind of Jewish. Or, for that matter, we find another contemporary of Rabbeinu Gershom, another great commentary known as the Meiri. And the Meiri actually calls him Ger Lachatzoyin, half a convert. So it's quite interesting that we see over here that the Ger Toishav is not just a really good non-Jew or top-notch Noachite. It's more than that. But obviously, we need to delve more into that, and perhaps we should actually backtrack and let's leave the last 8 minutes of today's for next time so we can start on that. So any questions or comments, let's leave out of what I just said about Rabbeinu Gershom and the Meiri. Anything up to that point. I know we said a lot, and there could be a lot of questions, comments, or whatever, but please, anybody have anything?
Rabbi?
Yes.
Am I on? The sound cut off for a second. I just wanted to point out that today's 3 Tammuz, right?
Yes. I could have given a whole class.
Huh?
Sorry, say it again. You weren't clear.
I was gonna say it's 3 Tammuz. The Rebbe, I know he got out of. See here. That's the problem. You can't hear it. Can you hear me now?
Now we hear you.
No. Never mind.
Try again. Maybe.
Oh, now you can hear me? All right. Well, on 3 Tammuz.
It's the video.
I got out of jail on.
Wow. On the 3rd of Tammuz? On the 3rd of Tammuz?
No, I got off on I got out on 13 Tammuz. But I remember 3rd Tammuz. This year, the 23rd falls on 23 Tammuz, I think, or on 3 Tammuz, or the day after. But the year that I got out, it was 13 Tammuz, 12-13 Tammuz, which is when the Rebbe got out. And I wrote him, and I was blessed with a miracle because I was totally smoked. Like I was paroling to it. My father-in-law, my ex-wife, they're Orthodox, they're Jewish, and my son's Jewish. But I'm not totally Jewish. We have a mysterious background in my family. We don't really know. Like all
Jewish.
of it.
I was just talking about either you are or you aren't.
Yeah, I know. That's what we were talking about. But with the other details that you went into, my son is, but I lost custody of him because I went to jail. I got in trouble. And that's when I learned to really pray and know to fear God. And I was given a miracle. And I was reading the Psalms, everything you're supposed to say when you receive an open miracle like that. And I think it's also the Rebbe's Yarzeit today, isn't it?
No.
It's somebody's Yarzeit. There's another guy's Yarzeit today.
What you're doing is, first of all, you're mixing in Rebbe number 6 and Rebbe number 7, which is fine because they're one and the same, but it's 2 different people. And you are opening up for an entire class, which I chose not to give today because I didn't feel that it's related to our topic. But by all means, I am very passionate about it, and I could have.
I pledged to the Rebbe that I would learn, because my son hasn't been observing, that I would learn Hebrew letters with him. Though I'm waiting until he's back around, even though I don't have custody. He's around, and I have funds set up for him and everything. I know pretty much where he's at and everything, but I just don't have rights.
How old is your son?
Still talk to her, and try to be there for her. But I would not at
all mind continuing this conversation with you. I just think it's better if we do it in private. So if you want, you can privately contact me, and you can call me. That's really how I work. I give you my number. Everybody can listen to my number again: 773-653-7770. 773-653-7770. You can call me or at least leave me a message, and hopefully I'll get back to you. Anyway, but yes, today is Gimel Tammuz, which is a very, very powerful day And it is the day that the sixth Rebbe in 1927, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, was released from prison and was sent to a city, a remote city of exile for 3 years. And lo and behold, about a week later, on his birthday, he was freed. Instead of 3 years, he spent a week. And then he was completely freed, 12th and 13th. They told him, and then they gave him the papers the next day. So for those of you that caught a little bit of what we were saying over here. So the Hebrew month we're in now is the month of Tammuz, Tammuz, Tammuz. And today is the 3rd of Tammuz, and which means that in a week it'll be the 12th and the 13th of Tammuz, which are very powerful days, because that's when in 1927 in the former Soviet Union was a tremendous miracle, and the then Rebbe, leader of world Jewry, was miraculously freed. Anyone else?
James Nelson.
James.
Hi, Rabbi Turin. I'm trying to phrase this question. I'm trying to be precise in my speech here. So when a non-Jew on his own personally accepts the Malchus of Hashem, accepts the kingship of Hashem and his kingdom, Jews today in a Ger Toshav situation, when it comes to the Sheva mitzvahs, can't accept him today. But where does the when it comes to the relationship to Goyim, actual nations, now that non-Jew has accepted the kingship of Hashem, where does that place that non-Jew in relationship to Goyim? And I'm referring to nations, not people. Are they like they're, now forgive me, I'm going to use a non-Chabad term, but like his Shoresh, and the Ramchal talks about this in Derech Hashem, like his root, the soul of his root is attached to certain Goyim or certain nations, whether it be Yisrael, of course, is attached to Yisrael. Where is the attachment now to non-Jews? Because there's a lot of us. We want to know, where is our attachment now? Even though the Jewish people can't accept it, I'm Makabla and things like that. But could you just talk about that, or if you have any answers?
So I will not say anything definitively. I'm not, I don't have a very strong grounded source offhand. But what I will say, and I just want to clarify that what in your question, which is an excellent point, the question itself, and let me explain for the benefit of everyone else. What I think you've done, though, is right now, at least, we're still speaking strictly legally, not spiritually, if I can make that split. And
yes.
With your question, you're bringing us into what's inevitably, we're going to get there, obviously, into the spiritual element of that. Right now, we're speaking very, if I may, dry legal, that this is a Jew, and then this is a non-Jew. But then we have within the non-Jewish world, the Ger Toishav, and then we have the acceptance, and then we have this type of acceptance, and so on. So far, what we're saying tonight is that for everybody, ideally, there are 2 stages, and they have to go in this order. First, the acceptance of the sovereignty, the acceptance of what we call the yoke of heaven, and only thereafter, step number 2. So we're saying here in this talk, in this Sicha, that not only is that the case for the Jew, but that's the case for the Ger Toishav. And then we brought in that's the case for the regular convert, the Ger. And then what we're going to get to is we're going to say, and that's the same way that it's even nowadays for your regular Noachite. And that's why we're splitting between the Avodah Zarah prohibition, the idolatry, and the rest. But to answer your question, I don't feel comfortable. I don't, at this point, without researching it. The question that James was asking is, what's the spiritual root and connection that presumably the entire audience that I'm talking to now, or whoever is going to be interested enough to listen to a full hour instead of just, skim it and say, okay, whatever. I am speaking to non-Jews that want to and are embracing the divine laws, the 7 Noahide commandments, with the understanding and the acceptance that this is God's given commandments to them. So the question is, where does that place you, spiritually speaking? And I am avoiding answering that just out of lack of knowledge. I don't want to say what I don't know at the moment.
That's fine. Thank you, Rabbi Turin. I appreciate it.
But
The interesting thing.
I hope that people appreciate the direction that Bob's question is taking us to, and we will need to deal with that. It's just that we're not even nearly halfway through this particular talk, but we will, get to it.
The Messianic era, though.
Pardon?
If it was the Messianic era, then some of that stuff's going to change, isn't it? That would be one of the things I think that would be coming with it, right?
Believe it or not, guys,
it's the reinstatement of all that.
I don't even know if you guys mean it. You actually don't, but you're really, I think it's the energy of the day of the 3rd of Tammuz. You guys are hitting upon such, not loaded, such powerful subjects. You just brought up
Baruch Hashem.
That's a whole other discussion. A whole other lecture is, where are we right now in the Jewish year of 5783, or in the secular year of, 2023? Oh, 2023. Where are we now as far as the prophets and the biblical and prophetic Messianic era? Where are we? Are we right before the Messianic era? Are we in the Messianic era? And if so, how deep are we? That is a whole lecture for itself, or a series, I should say. And again, I'm very passionate about that as well, and I don't want to avoid it. But right now, we just don't have time, and it's again, I'm not going to do justice in answering it in 10 minutes or something. So we have one thing is the 3rd of Tammuz, which we did not discuss, and this next.
James B.
James B. James.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can anybody hear? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. All the way from Springfield.
Thank you, sir. Yes. Forgive me. Always an excellent class and discussion. Thank you, everyone. And I apologize for getting back to basics. I never. My question is, why is a month in the Hebrew calendar called Tammuz?
Wow.
I thought it was the son of Nimrod and Semiramis. That was his child's name.
Really,
so
hitting topics like, wow, you guys are really doing well. Okay, so that again would probably be a whole lecture, but this one I actually feel that I could tackle it in 2-3 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. First of all, biblically speaking, according to the actually I should say the 5 books of Moses, not the Nach. That's it. Normally the written law includes all of Tanakh, all 24 books. According to the 5 books of Moses, no Jewish month has a name, just like no day of the week besides for Shabbos has a name. Sunday is the first day, Monday is the second day, and so on. That's what it is. Same thing, the months. There's the first month of the year, which is the month we left Egypt. That's where we have Passover. There's a second month, third month, fourth month. They don't have any names. The names came along later, and therefore in the later books, you will find their names in the prophets, in Navi, or in the scriptures. Now these names, we picked them up basically when the Jewish people were exiled and they went to Babylon, and they're Babylonian names, and we adopted them and we brought them with, and to oversimplify it, for convenience sake, the name stuck, and it's easier to deal with a month that has a name. So Nisan is the month of Passover, and this is now the 4th month that we're in now, and it's called Tammuz. The problem is, Tammuz is actually a name of adultery. Or I should say idolatry, sorry. Tammuz is the name of an idolatrous god. And actually, there's a verse that says that they were crying, worshiping the Tammuz. So, question is raised: why do we, Jewish people, have a month which has the name of an idolatrous god or deity? How does that work? And the answer is a very interesting one. That just because the idolatrous non-Jews, nations of the world, or whoever, those particular people, decided to worship it, which is really the sun, are we therefore going to destroy the world? And the example given is, without going into all of the very, very detailed laws about technicalities in something which is worship, like if somebody manufactures something, someone took a piece of gold, and this non-Jew took the gold, or the Jew, and they made it into a statue, and they worship it. Well, now that is forbidden for anyone to derive benefit or pleasure from it. You need to destroy it. Well, what happens if someone builds a house and now they worship the house? So then again, the house needs to be destroyed. Very nice. But what happens if someone takes something of public property or beyond, such as, let's say the sun? So now some people worship the sun. Does that mean that we can't derive any benefit from the sun? So, of course not. That's ridiculous. Someone cannot forbid someone else's property or public property on others. So if someone decides to go over to public property and turn that into their deity of worship, that means nothing, and that doesn't harm us. So similarly, the name of Tammuz is, in fact, a name of idolatry, and yet there's no problem, and there's a lot more deeper explanation to that. No coincidence. These names are took. For example, the month of the Exodus in Egypt called Nisan. The word itself, in its roots in the Holy Tongue in Hebrew, means miracle or spirit. All right, we have time for maybe another one.
If I may, just lastly, thank you, sir. I gather from that there's redemptive potential in all. In everyone.
The month of Tammuz, and especially today, the 3rd of Tammuz, you basically hit it right on the head. Redemptive energy, yes, 100%. We want to sum it up. If I want to sum up a 3 to 4 hour lecture that I'm not giving, I would conclude by saying today is redemptive energy. You got it.
Aaron has his hand up.
Aaron, go ahead. Aaron?
I was thinking about that on my way back to the office. Aaron Ben Noach, we cannot hear you. Here and there.
Aaron?
I could just put in my car.
Technology, gotta love it.
Hello, Rabbi Turan. I asked to ask a question in the chat.
Yes. He asked a question in the chat.
There was a question in the chat, yes?
Oh yes. I know. Out of curiosity, I don't know if I heard it right, but you mentioned the name Gershoi, or if that's
Gershoim. That's the name of the great rabbi that we quoted before. Rabbeinu means our teacher Gershoim.
How do you spell that? Because I don't know if it has similarities with mine. I'm just curious.
How you would spell it?
Yes.
Well, it's actually a biblical name. It's one of the 2 sons of Moses. So I'll spell to you in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Gimel.
Gimel.
Resh.
Yes.
Shin,
Mm-hmm.
Vav, and then because it's the last letter, the final Mem. Gimel, Reish, Vav, Shin, and final Mem.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you
And then
for.
a very, very similar name to that, that instead of being the Mem at the end, it's the Nun at the end.
Oh, I see. I see.
Two different names.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Rabbi Turner might be able to help out because I can read his name. Gershom, it is your name transliterated, by the way.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
And James, how would you know?
Yeah, my son, I named my son Gershom as well.
Oh, I see.
Thank you.
Oh, you got to be sharp.
Yes, Baruch Hashem.
Very good, very good. Okay, so we are looking at next week. Don't really anticipate, right? Any
Next week, good, yeah.
I think so. Give me a second here. Yeah, we're looking at next week. Okay, so next week we're going to start back from the last like 8 minutes or so of today's class, and we'll hopefully take it from there. All right, everybody, be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everybody.